Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of the STEMs of Grad School podcast. Today, we have Jessica Minnick, who is a fifth year PhD student in chemistry. And we were actually lab mates for the time that I was in grad school. And so today we're going to kind of do a reverse kind of podcast where Jessica has actually come on and she's going to be asking me a lot of questions about research, and things like that. And so we're so happy to have Jessica here today with us.
Well, thanks for having me. It's fun to be on. Of course,
Yeah.
I'll help you out with anything. So how could I say no?
Thank you. That's very necessary.
So are we, you just want to jump right on in?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Well, let's start off with a very general question that's going to lead to more questions later on down the road. So first off, do you want to just share with us how you got to where you are today?
Yeah. So I did my bachelor's in chemistry. And when I left my bachelor's, I was like, I want to, go to grad school because that's what we all think is let's go to grad school, let's not get a job. So I got accepted at the University of Nebraska. And so I went there and I did my research in mass spectrometry, as you know. I did a lot of different research projects there and kind of found out what I was interested in. And then I did a lot of things in like biology related mass spectrometry. And so I ended up taking a postdoc outside of Nebraska that was focused on basically performing mass spectrometry for a biologist. And from there, I ended up actually quitting that postdoc and starting what is now, part of this podcast, but the Science Grad School Coach, which is the business that I have, where I basically try and help graduate students with research and put out YouTube videos and blogs and courses on, how to master your research. And that's kind of what led to this podcast that we're doing now.
Yeah, a whole guidebook on how to survive in grad school because all of us grad students definitely need the help.
Well, it's like I needed the help when I was starting out in grad school.
Oh, 100%. I still need the help and I've been in grad school. So
that's fair.
So you mentioned that you joined a mass spectrometry group after doing a bit of getting your bachelor's in chemistry, and then you went on to do more biology, and then you went on to do a postdoc in kind of reproductive biology group. So I guess a good question would be, how did you find what research you enjoyed and then chose to make a career out of that research?
Yeah, so I started off, so when I was in undergrad, I did multiple different like undergraduate research opportunities. And I did them in organic chemistry. I did it in like materials science, pharmaceuticals. I like went all the way around the gamut, did environmental chemistry. And for some reason, I was like, okay, I want to be an organic chemist. Obviously, I did not go that route, but whenever I started in grad school, I started in an organic chemistry lab, and I absolutely hated it. But I was like, no, I said I was going to be an organic chemist. Like, I'm going to try and like just stick it out. And I was just like, the one thing that like made me notice something is when in organic chemistry, you do a lot of NMRs, right? Because you're trying to make sure you made your molecule. I would spend hours like analyzing my NMRs, making them like very nicely annotated and all of that. And then all the organic chemists would just be like, why'd you spend that much effort? Like, just show us that you did. Like, they were like, we don't even want to see your NMRs. Just tell us you did it and that it confirmed. And I was like, but I did all this effort. Like, I really enjoyed the analysis and the data analysis. And in organic chemistry, there's kind of limited data analysis where the bulk of your time is spent making molecules, right? And so that's kind of when I changed and started thinking, okay, maybe analytical chemistry is what I want to do because I enjoy doing that. And so I actually first applied to rotate into a chromatography lab and was told that I couldn't join that lab because they were like full at the time. So that's when my second choice was mass spectrometry. And I got in and I don't know, it just like kind of clicked and I really enjoyed what I was doing. And then I ended up getting into creating collaborations and doing more biology work than just kind of fundamental chemistry work, and found that I even enjoyed that a lot more.
Yeah, so you just dabble in a lot of research, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of helpful when you like do a lot of things and go, oh, I don't want to do that again. I do want to do this again.
I know what I like and I know what I don't like.
Right?
I had a similar experience because in undergrad, I loved organic chemistry. I was really good at class and I was really good at the lab. But I did a little bit of undergrad research in mass spectrometry. So I just thought I need to go through analytical chemistry. And this whole time I thought, what if I just would have went organic? But I agree. Like my favorite part about organic was just analyzing the NMR and figuring out what compound do I have from this NMR. So I just kind of solidified that, I'm actually in the division of chemistry right now. So
yeah, I mean, I think that's really important to like know why you like something. Because there, like in organic chemistry, there is a decent amount of analytical chemistry because they all kind of relate to each other. So if you really liked a class, actually thinking about what you really liked about that class. And then kind of delving further into that and going, okay, well, maybe I want to take an extra class on this versus just staying in something because you were like, oh, I like that class, so that's what I want to become.
Right. Then that's a whole rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Well, jumping on to another question. Doing research, which we all do, so we know how exhausting it can be. And it doesn't work out all the time. And that kind of sucks. So during those negative times when research just wasn't going your way, how did you get through that and stay positive and just push through?
Yeah. So I think it depends a lot on why it's not going your way. And I'll give like a couple different examples here probably. But when I was doing research, there were certain things that I knew could work. So for like example, we had an LC that was a little frustrating in the lab. Yeah, I mean, it was a very old LC and there was always it was like hooked up to an instrument that it wasn't always hooked up to. So there was always a lot of issues around that. But there was no question as to whether the research itself could be done. Like we knew the LC could separate things. We knew it could go into a mass, like there was no question about that, right? So like on a theoretical level, do you know that this can work? And is it just a matter of troubleshooting it and trying to figure out how you get to make it work in that situation? And I think that is a very different mindset because it's like, okay, it's more about figuring out what is wrong and not trying to figure out, will I ever be successful? Yeah. And so if you're in that mindset, it's just really troubleshooting until it starts working for you, which can be really stressful and frustrating, and learning when to walk away from it because you're not doing anything. Maybe it's late at night and you've been doing it for 4 hours, and just learning, okay, it's not getting ran tonight. I'm going to walk away. I'll come back in tomorrow. And I mean, sometimes magically I'd come in the next day and suddenly it would work, And so it's just like getting to that point and trying to figure out, like, are you making strides forward? Are you like starting to get certain parts to work? Okay, then maybe keep going at it. But like, if you're just like out of ideas, walking away. The other thing, though, is like when you actually don't know it's possible. And so there's like a lot of research ideas that I would have. And they're probably like really not feasible in general. But I would be like, okay, here's a research idea I have. I'm going to go in and kind of test this out. Like, see, I remember one example of this is I was wondering if you like made a massive metabolomic, so a small molecule mixture, and you sprayed it into the mass spectrometer, could you actually separate everything out by IMS and then run CID on it? Right? Like, probably not going to work. But I was like, well, what if it did? So I made these mixtures and I went, and I don't think anyone ever knows I did this outside of you in this podcast. But I think it was like 4th of July. And I was like, I want to go figure this out. So I went into the lab and I sprayed these mixtures and I was just like, no. It was just like one massive like curve. Like I was just like, and I was like, I could sit here and mess with all the parameters and try and figure out, could I spread this out enough? And I was just like, you know what? Like, I have other projects. This is probably not going to be feasible. It's not smart for me to spend my time trying to do this because this probably needs to be done, 5 or 6 projects, well, probably more than that, like 50 or 60 projects down the road. Like, let's focus on one class of molecules first and see if we can separate those out before we're trying to separate out a full metabolomics mixture. And now, like, there's a whole new instrument that could probably do that now, which is, the cyclic. Yeah. And so, like, I don't think it was anything that was ever going to be possible with what I had. And so it's learning to recognize when to walk away from something versus, okay, I think it's going to be feasible, but it's really, really hard right now. Which is like when I was starting out, I was doing amino acid work and I could not get signal for the life of me. Don't know why. Could not get signal. But I was like, I feel like you should be able to get these signals. Right? Like, I don't know for a fact, like there wasn't other people who had measured these with metals, right? So I don't know for a fact, like I know LC works, but like, I feel like you can, and I feel like I'm just missing something. And so that was something where I was like, okay, I'm going to keep working. I'm going to focus on just a couple of amino acids instead of trying to do them all and see if I can actually get signal, and then take what I learned from doing those and then expand it. So it was like kind of 3 different categories and 3 different examples.
Yeah, that is good advice to take a subset of what you do and focus on that. So that way, you can focus your time and your energy, and then if it works or if it doesn't work, and then how to proceed from there. So that's great advice.
I remember on that project with the amino acids, I actually forgot about and missed my first TA meeting, because I was in the lab making those 20 amino acid samples and absolutely none of them worked. Like, I got 0 signal from any of them. And like, that's when I started realizing to do initial experiments first, optimize your stuff first and focus on that, and then expand later on, because you're just going to waste more and more time as you try and do everything in one bulk load.
Right. And time is precious.
Time is precious. And energy is. Like, you did all that energy and now you're so frustrated because you spent 4 hours making solutions that are useless.
Yeah, exactly. And who wants to go to a TA meeting anyway?
That's valid. But they kind of get mad when you forget about them.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
So, during your time at grad school, how many research projects did you juggle at one time?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. At one time, I feel like as I was coming off one project, I was diving into another project. So I think probably the most I was juggling at one time would probably have been at the end of my PhD, when I had kind of mass spectrometry imaging. I had a couple different projects in that at a time. I had just gotten a new project on IMS and glycopeptides. I was still managing the writing for these previous projects on LC separation of steroids. So that was probably a time where I was probably juggling 4 major projects at a single time. And I definitely felt it. I was getting very, very stressed out towards the end. But I think during most of my time in grad school, it was as I was finishing up data collection, at least for one project, I would start planning the other project. And then when I was data collecting that, I was working on writing the previous projects instead of trying to data collect multiple projects at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So do you have any advice in terms of time management with handling projects, even for those who have to do 2 projects in parallel?
Yeah, so I would suggest, one, knowing your research times. So actually scheduling out during your week, what are your times that are dedicated to research? And then within that, deciding how you manage your project. So is it every other week you're getting data on only one project for that week, but then you switch every week? Or is it something like what I call project multitasking? So it's if you can data collect one thing unsupervised and then work on something else that you actually have to pay attention to. So in my case, that would be something like running an LC run. I could run those for like 10 hours that I didn't have to be there at the instrument, So then I could be doing my data analysis or my writing on a different project that wasn't related to that one while I'm still being productive and collecting data on it. So doing kind of that type of things, but you don't want to be, and then also like having reasonable expectations for both of the things. So if you are juggling 2 projects, you don't need to put expectations on yourself or tell other people expectations like you're only juggling one of them. So if it's going to take you longer, you should know how long it takes you to run certain things once you get a certain point into your research. And so you can be like, well, I mean, this is going to take a month to run by itself, but I also have this other project. So give me about a month and a half to 2 months, right? Right. And then that way, I think whenever you know the time expectations for things, especially if you're in collaborative projects, people want you to be real with them. So if you tell them 2 weeks, they're going to expect it in 2 weeks, even if it can't take you even if it takes you a month to do it, now they're mad at you. But if you tell them a month and a half and you get it done in a month, they're happy with you, right? So it's like managing expectations. I do that all the time. I always tell people longer than I think it'll take me to do. Always.
Oh, really? Because I think I have the opposite thing. I
think you do.
And then it's stressful for me. And then I'm like, well, shit, got it done.
I remember one time my advisor he wanted something in a certain amount of time. And I was like, I'm really stressed. I think he said like 1 week. And I was like, I just have a lot going on. Can we make it 2 weeks? And he was like, okay, I got it to him that night. So it's like, especially when you've made a like history of getting things done early, they're like more willing to give you additional time because they're like, if she's saying she's stressed and can't get it to me, then she really can't get it to me then, so, and it's like, well, sometimes I can, sometimes I can't, but I'm giving myself the liberty to work on things as I choose to and like as I have time to, because I'm managing everyone else's expectations.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say, set your own expectations.
Mm-hmm. And like set them correctly. Because if you are constantly putting those expectations way too soon, that is really stressful. Because now you have all these impending deadlines that you're just like, I don't know how I meet these when you could have just said later.
Yep, I'm going to quit. See y'all, this ain't for me. So we talked about, the juggling of research projects, and you mentioned how you had your final time, you had a bunch of projects that you were juggling at one time. So I guess this is a good leadway into a good question that once people get to a point where they're towards the end of their degree, how do you know that they have enough research to start writing their dissertation? At what point do you begin to think, maybe I should get started on that?
Yeah. So I think that especially if your advisor doesn't make it clear how much they expect from you, as PhD students, we always assume we don't have enough. Because we always assume our advisor is going to tell us when we do, and then they never do. So I think a good time to at least start having that conversation is when you get PhD candidacy. I think that's a time you should go and sit down with your advisor and be like, what do you expect from me to be able to graduate? And like when you walk into that meeting, walk in with your projects and where you are at in each of them, so that you can go in and you can be like, this is what I have. What do I need to do to get to that level? And I know in like some departments, they actually do, to get candidacy, you like actually do a dissertation proposal. So that like kind of solves that problem for you. But like our department doesn't like that. We like had to do a proposal on something completely outside of our research area, which like is weird. But yeah, like actually going in and talking with them and being like, this is what I have. What do you expect? Is this what you expect? And I just need to start writing, and just having kind of a frank conversation with them. Because they'll generally tell you, hey, you need to go get 3 more projects. And then you're like, well, if I want to graduate in, 2 years whenever you do your candidacy, but let's say 2 years,
Right.
you're like, I got to get 3 projects in 2 years, and maybe you only have one. You're like, okay, I need it. And then you kind of, what you need to start doing to plan to get to your graduation date on time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really good advice, because it not only makes your advisor aware of where you stand with the project in your years there, but also where you stand, and you kind of have an idea of how many years you want to spend doing your degree. So,
right.
At that point, you need to be like, okay, is finishing it in this short amount of time feasible with what? Yeah, that's a great suggestion, is to go talk with your PI, because who knows more than your PI?
I mean, that is true. Like, your PI is like head of your committee. And so they're gonna be the ones that ultimately decide whether to pass or fail you. So you want to make sure that you're at least meeting there. And they usually know what the department expects and what your committee would expect to have enough research. Because that really varies between even like divisions of chemistry. Like,
yeah, extremely.
If you're in like organic chemistry, you could probably have one paper and be ready to graduate. Where if you're in analytical chemistry with one paper, you're not graduating, or at least one project. It doesn't matter if they're published or not. But yeah, it's like they're going to know what they expect and what the department usually expects, because they've sat in on defenses at that point.
Right. Yeah, that is completely true. So continuing with, the dissertation writing. And so once you have talked to your advisor, you kind of have an idea of where you stand. What do you think is a good time frame from the beginning, when you start writing your dissertation and getting everything together, to having it fully completed?
That's such a good question. Honestly, I know this isn't the answer you want, but I think it really depends. Which is like,
no one wants that answer.
Yeah, no one wants that answer. But I'll be a little bit more specific in it. Okay. It depends in what is it that you need to complete between when you start writing and when you finish, right? So if you're talking about me, I had a 12-chapter dissertation. So if you're
overachiever.
So if you're asking, like, I had to plan a longer time than someone who has a 6-chapter dissertation, to be able. So I think it's more, and I think that's why it's so important to have that conversation when you're a PhD candidate. Because when you're a PhD candidate, you have a time in your head for when you want to get out of there, right? Like, you have a time, and it could be, if your like graduation cycle is usually 5 years, it could be that 5th year mark. It could be shorter. It could be longer. It could be anything.
Right.
But you have a time. And so if you're having that conversation when you're a PhD candidate, now you can plan that out. And if they are like, hey, you're almost done, then okay, I can start writing now. So when I actually started writing my dissertation before I was a PhD candidate, because I knew it was going to take me so long. But so you can be like, okay, I'm going to start writing now so that everything's kind of ready to go. And then, because really the earlier you start writing, the longer you can take to write. And so you can be writing up your first couple chapters while working on, like, still collecting data for your last couple chapters.
Yeah.
So that's why it really depends. But I think being unrealistic. I mean, on the realistic side, if you're like, I want to get out of here as quickly as possible, I think you should probably give yourself at least a month per chapter to write, edit, everything. I think to like get a figure outline, write, edit, get it all done, I would say at least a month per chapter to actually have a good dissertation. But that's putting a lot of time per week into your dissertation. So if you want to not put as much time and not feel as stressed, I think I gave myself 18 months to complete my dissertation from my graduation date. So like I was not very stressed, and like writing was like the last thing on my mind, because it was like I had to put in a couple hours every week and I was good. So that's kind of why it depends so much on, how much time have you given yourself?
Wow, we're really complete opposites.
Yeah, we really are.
Yeah, I'm like trying to write my dissertation in like a month. It's not working out so well. Do not advise anyone to do that. You will not get it done, I promise.
Go ahead.
weird because, people are different. Like you can work earlier. I just can't do that because I have to feel that pressure to get it done.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't have the pressure to get it done, it just stays on the back burner until that time arrives and I want to get the hell out. And it's time to go into something new.
Yeah, it's also hard to like, it feels so distant until it's not. And
Right.
then
Yes.
by the time it doesn't feel distant, you're already not making that deadline. Like that's kind of
you're already late.
yeah. And so making sure that you like plan your dissertation out is going to be important to like establish those deadlines earlier so that it constantly feels like you're under pressure. And instead of having the date in your head. So like if you're going to graduate in May, thinking, okay, I got till May, and you don't have till May.
Never has that been more true.
That's always true. And I think that's why like people constantly, have to delay graduation because they think that they have longer than they really do have. It's like delaying graduation isn't like wrong or anything. It's just if you want to get out by a certain time, you really have to do a lot of planning and not just think, okay, till May.
Yeah, it's really nice to know that time frame with which you will have everything to finish. And so if you have that time frame and you want to be more like you, what advice do you have people to stay productive during that time to consistently get things done and not keep saying, oh, I have time? Do you have a reward system? Like I get a cookie or I don't know, a vacation or something.
I wish that would actually be a great idea to have a reward system. I did it more like negative. Well, I guess not technically negative reinforcement, but like negativism. But like, so
your
like
whole life.
Yeah, that's my life. I actually made like a dissertation plan. And so like a couple things that's really important if you're working on your dissertation is one, your graduation date is not the date you need to have stuff done by. Your defense date, not the date you need to have stuff done by. Also, defense date is not the end of the semester, right? Like there's a couple like key things that people think. They're like, okay, I have till the end of the semester to do everything. And it's like, no, that's not valid. Usually there's a specific end for defenses for every department because it takes so long for the registrar's office and everyone to process your paperwork. And a lot of times I think it's about 2 weeks before the end of the semester.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. So you have that date and if you go, okay, I want to graduate in this semester, here's when I need to defend. Okay, now when do I need to submit my dissertation? Because a lot of people think their defense date's their dissertation deadline. And that's not true either. Because a lot of places, you're probably 2 to 8 weeks before your defense, you need to submit your dissertation, either to your advisor or to your committee.
Right.
And so when you actually nail down that actual real deadline, when do you need to have your dissertation done? It's going to put a little bit more pressure on you. Like automatically, you're going to be like, oh, I have a lot less time than I thought. And so what I did is I kind of figured out how much I needed to do for each chapter I had. So like some chapters I had already written as papers and I just needed to like reformat. Other chapters I had a general like scheme of what I wanted to say. And like some I had no idea what I was going to say in them. So I kind of created different timelines based on how much I had to do. And then I put in deadlines and I was like, okay, I'm meeting this deadline or else. Kind of a thing. Like mine was negative. Instead of I'm leaving this deadline, I get to go for vacation. I feel like that probably would have been much better reinforcement. But yeah, actually putting in those deadlines, and I actually stuck to them. I think once I told my advisor that those were my deadlines and he put them in his calendar, I was like, he's gonna know. And so like that put the pressure on me to like actually make sure I was getting them done.
Goes back to your expectations. You got to keep them high.
Yep, you do. You gotta, a lot of times I was like, sometimes I would mess up and I would be like, okay, I'm completing this in 2 weeks. And man, it would be a rough 2 days to get it done in 2 weeks.
So what is the overall structure of a dissertation, and how would you go about structuring it if you're not giving guidelines to how those are structured?
So yeah, I think when you're talking about the structure of a dissertation, there's kind of two typical formats that they fall in. And one is kind of where you have an introduction / a literature review, and then you go through each of your research projects as separate chapters, and then you kind of have a conclusion chapter to like wrap it all up. That's like one really common format. And then the other common format is where you actually have like one of your research chapters as your entire dissertation. So where you have like an introduction, methods chapter, results chapter, discussion chapter, conclusion chapter. And I think it really depends on your field and your lab, maybe, and even your discipline. Well, your university is what I meant, on which one you fall in. And so looking at others' dissertations and theses from your lab or even from your
university
department, university or department, looking at theirs and saying, okay, what kind of format did they follow? And then trying to match to them. And, and I think that often depends on kind of what field, right? Because like we said, if you're in organic chemistry and you do one paper, that's usually really, really amazing. And so if you have that kind of system, you may fall more into the second category, where your one research paper really gets broken up and you dive really in depth in everything. Versus in like analytical chemistry, it's like 3 to 5 projects is about average. So if you tried to like combine all those projects into an introduction chapter or methods chapter, it would be really confusing for people. So I think that kind of decides which way you sway. So looking at other people in your department or your labs dissertations, or even asking your advisor and saying, what's the typical style for these dissertations? And they can usually let you know which one you kind of fall into.
Yeah. So for the one that has the introduction followed by your separate research chapters and introduction, what would you say you wanted to start maybe your first research chapter? What advice do you have on how to write and then structure that chapter within your dissertation?
So the first thing that I always do, and my advisor actually taught me to do this, was to create a figure outline before you ever start writing anything. And so what a figure outline basically is it is all of your figures. I mean, it's what it says, right? Like it's all of your figures that would be in your paper, but like actually finalized, and actually learn to sit there and go from figure to figure and tell a story. And when you can do that, when you can say, okay, this figure shows this, so then we ask this question, and this figure is the answer to that question, right? And kind of going like that and telling a story with it, you've basically created your research paper, you just haven't written it down. And so learning to do that, and when you feel like whenever you look at a figure outline and you go, it's just a lot, that usually means that you need to start breaking things up, right? Like it should flow as a story. And if you're like having to say, and then we went this way, and now we're coming back up here, and then we went this way, and now we're coming back up here, and then we go this way, then it's probably that those branching points are maybe even 3 different papers. And so it's kind of doing that. Can you really tell a story with your data? And then once you do that, you know what that chapter is about. And so I even would say, and I even did, make your figure outline before you even write your introduction. I know a lot of people think, like writing your introduction and your methods when you're collecting data. So all you have to do is come back and write your results and discussion. But you don't really know what to put in your introduction until you have your figure outline.
Right. You don't know what background you're going to have to give. Yeah. Your data makes sense.
Because you may even look at this and be like, oh, I want to ask this question. And all of a sudden you're like, you thought you were going to write a paper talking about, I don't know, from my experience, like metabolism of toxins. And instead you're writing an entire paper on oxidative stress, right? And so if you wrote that introduction earlier, it's literally just a ton of rewriting it and editing it. When if you just hold off, analyze all your data, like my introductions take me 30 minutes to an hour to write whenever I have my figure outline, because I'm like, oh, I'm going to talk about why this is important. I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about that, mention these 3 papers, and I'm done, and you can do that once you have, your figure outline versus just trying to figure out, what might be important when I finally get these results back.
Yeah, like you can focus more on what you'll actually do. So I, just for curiosity reasons, I kind of want to jump off of the dissertation train and go back, kind of circle back to your first question. How did you get to where you are today? And so, you got your PhD in like 3.5 years. Stellar, you're a rock star. Went into a postdoc, finished your postdoc already. And instead of going into academia or industry or even science policy, journalism type deal, you said, well, let me be an entrepreneur and start a business. So, what about you wanted to start a business? And is it just that you like to help others and you like the work that you do? So, you want to talk about or share with us how you came about with this business plan and this business idea?
So yeah, kind of definitely zigzagging there. So when I graduated with my PhD, I had zero interest in starting a business. I thought I was going to be a professor. And after going through some, especially in my postdoc, some really kind of toxic academia type things, I was just done. I was done with everything. And I realized that I had, this sounds really conceited. I'm trying not to make it be, but I realized that I was actually good at doing research. And there was information that I knew about research that I had learned from making a lot of mistakes and doing a lot of things wrong. And I was like, and I really loved giving advice to people. I wanted people to come up and ask me for advice. And I'd be like, yeah, let me tell you all this stuff I know. Not because I know it, but because I could help them.
I've been through it. I lived through that.
So I actually enjoyed that. And I was like, well, what if I could help more people? What if I could take what I know that you never take a class on how to write a research paper, like an actual scientific paper. There's no classes on it. Even when we took intro to grad research, it was all useless. It wasn't
Agreed.
Here's how to read a research paper. Here's how to develop ideas. Here's how to see if your idea will actually work. Here's how to write a proposal. There's just none of that when you're going through grad school. And I was like, I know this information and I don't want to just keep it to myself. And my hope was that I was going to become, a professor and I was going to teach all my students all this cool information and they were going to be really successful. And, that's not coming about, obviously. But I was like, I don't have to become a professor to tell people. I don't have to become a professor to help people. And so I kind of created this, and it has definitely evolved much over time. When I first did it, I was like, I'm just going to make a YouTube channel. If you look at my old YouTube videos, they are they're interesting. They are all over the map. They don't talk about research at all. And then I started getting really into talking about research. And I kind of realized that's what really resonates with people. That's what's really lacking is how do you write a research paper introduction? I know there are people, and when I first started writing them, I would spend months trying to write a research paper introduction. And like I just said, I can do it in 30 minutes to an hour now because I know the structure. And trying to analyze papers. I remember sitting at the Starbucks in South Lincoln for 8 hours one day, looking at other people's introductions, trying to write my first research paper introduction. And being like, okay, well, they said this sentence here, so I'm going to kind of say something similar. I didn't know what I was doing. And I ended up rewriting that entire paper. I wrote it once and I was like, okay, this is garbage. And so I rewrote the whole paper and I was like, okay, it's probably still garbage compared to today's standards. That was 4 years ago. But it's realizing what I've learned and the fact that I can help other people. And so I created a YouTube channel, created a blog. Now I'm creating courses to try and get this information out to people in a way that's really simplified, where I'm not, Because I feel like a lot, even the people who know it, they don't know how to teach it. They don't know how to tell it to someone else. They're like, oh, you just write your introduction. Like, you don't know how to do that? How do you not know how to do that? And I'm like, well, they don't know because they were never told, right?
Yeah. When in all reality, you know, those people had the same questions back when they were just starting out, that they've had to go through the same process and everything. So
yeah. And it's just like, and I understand like why it's hard to teach people like a system for writing papers. Cause like when I tried to create one, I had to go back and analyze my papers so much to be like, oh, that's what I did there. Like, oh, that's pretty cool. That was smart of me. But like, I didn't realize it while I was doing it. Right. I was just like, oh, and I write this now. So learning and like creating basically an outline that you can just kind of plug and play with your, you know, your own research and being like, oh, now I talk about this paper and how this led to this. And all of those things, you know, I found that a lot of people kind of resonated that. So that's kind of where I've swung my business in, is really focusing on what I know about research and how to that helps other people.
And how to help. You're such a sweet potato.
But am I?
I asked that question because, you know, I think a lot of grad students, and myself included, we focus on the research. And then when we teach, we have to focus on teaching. And then your end goal is your dissertation. But it's like, after your dissertation, you know, you have to get a job. So you can't to find out what career path. It's not always in academia or an industry that you have to choose to go. So, you know, figuring out what you're interested in and start your own business if that's what you want to do. So it's nice to see those different people who have similar degrees but choose to take their degree in a whole different path, and I think gives inspiration to others, and myself included, because I am definitely not an academia person, so I do not see the field.
And I think when you're in grad school, like you're surrounded by academia people, and you can get to the point where you think that is the only route. You know, you get your degree and you go take a postdoc, and I knew it wasn't. I knew, right, like, because everyone from our lab, there's no one who's gone into academia. Everyone's gone into industry.
Yeah.
But I was like, I wanted to help people. When I wanted to mentor research students and do, you know, the kind of research I wanted to do. So I did want an academia path. And yeah, like coming out of nowhere and doing kind of entrepreneurship is definitely not where I thought I would be at this point.
Coming out of left field there a little bit, Elena.
Yeah, I know, right? I was just like, I'm going to start a business. But it's also like realizing, even when you get into this, like I've taken online courses like that are provided by other people who are business people to learn how to run a business, and how, like, I didn't know what I was doing. And so learning to recognize when you don't know what you're doing, and then finding someone who's gonna teach you how to do it, instead of just sitting there and saying, well, I don't know, I'm just gonna not do it.
Yeah, especially recognizing that you don't know how to do it and doing something about it, and not just pretending that you know what you're doing when you don't.
Yeah, and that's
experience as well.
Yeah, and like if you look at the beginning of my YouTube channel, that was me pretending I knew what I was doing and I didn't. Right? Like I was like,
go back and watch those videos.
Oh my gosh!
What is this?
Oh my god! It's bad. There's, I mean, they're not that great now, but they were really bad then. I don't know what I was doing with my life.
It's a learning process.
It is, and finding out how to do things instead of just assuming you know.
Yeah.
Or assuming that you were supposed to know. And I feel like that's what, like when you're in research, a lot of people get into the thing of, I can't ask anyone because I'm already supposed to know this. And so if I ask, people are going to know that I don't know it. But at the same time, maybe they'll know that you don't know it. And one, maybe they weren't expecting you to. And two, you might as well find out now before waiting all this time. And then they really expect you to know.
Because you done set that bar for yourself.
Yeah. It's like, if you're going to hit the disappointment at some point in the train, just get it over with now.
Yeah, coming to terms with, you can't know it all, but you can know the extent of your own ignorance, and that's a good place to be.
Yeah, and learning to ask questions and allow other people to help you. And I know that's like a big thing that I've seen with other people and like even our research group, in that their own research was hindered because they wouldn't ask. They wouldn't ask and be like, can you, okay, I know I should know this, I'm sorry, but can you just sit down and help me for like an hour, teach me how to do this? And they would go months without doing something just because they didn't know and they didn't want to ask anyone. And that's a point you kind of have to get over in research. Like, I ask questions all the time and I don't care.
No.
I remember like, oh, go ahead.
Same. One thing I always knew is like, you ain't gonna get anywhere if you don't know what you're doing. So,
and like I'm willing to admit when I don't know. I remember like one time we were like trying to do something on the board and our advisor like asked me a question. I think he asked me like what the number was for some constant. And I was like, do you really expect me to know that? And he was like, yeah, why wouldn't you? And I was like, I don't know that. Well, give me a magnitude. I do not know. Like, just let's move past this point. I'll look it up later. Like, that's what Google's for. And it's just like being able to like humble yourself to know, okay, you don't know certain things. Ask someone so the next time you do know it. And if you need to take notes so that the next time you do know it and you're not constantly having to go back. And then eventually you'll be the person that someone else is afraid to ask.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I guess we're coming to an end here.
Yeah.
So I do want to just ask, I like to always ask people who I ask questions to, what, if you could just summarize, maybe in one sentence, what advice you would give to anyone in the grad school process, coming up on their dissertation, or just now starting in grad school, what advice do you have? Maybe even just life advice.
Yeah. So
this is pretty on the spot. It's a hard question.
Yeah, I kind of do know it. My one advice would be to slow down. Because I did not take that advice. But like and this will be a moment that like will always sadden me, I guess. When I got hooded, when I graduated, went through the whole ceremonious thing, it meant nothing because I was focused on the next day. I was traveling across country to go to start my postdoc, right? Like I was always focused on the next thing. I never was in the current moment. I like really what is a couple days, what is a couple months in the span of your life? Like what's a couple years? Focusing on like what matters to you now. And something that I've realized is, what does it matter if it, especially in like a PhD program, what does it matter if it takes you longer if you actually enjoyed that time? Like if you like actually had good memories and didn't like say no to opportunities because you were so focused on getting done at a certain time. Because I thought that once I graduated, my life was going to be so much better. And it was so much worse. Like it did not get better at all. And I wish that I would have valued and appreciated like my time in grad school, my time in undergrad, all of it more, instead of always being focused on what's the next thing, what's the next thing that's going to make me happy. And it hasn't happened yet. So you just got to find happiness where you're at right now and stop thinking the next thing is what's going to do it.
That's actually great advice.
I know it's surprising coming from me, right?
Top 3 advice I've ever heard from anyone. My favorite is someone I asked that just said, just go with it.
That's another good one.
And I've never heard anyone say slow down. And I think that's advice we could all take, no matter where we are in life, whether you're in grad school or not.
And that is true. Even now I'm like learning to slow down and just go with it. Like, I don't know what my life is going to be. I don't know if I'm going to be an entrepreneur for the rest of it. I don't know if I'm going to take not a real job. That's kind of mean, but like take a like full-time research job again. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in my life. And I've like very recently gotten to the point where I've realized either I'm going to be happy now and I have to make that choice. Like, it's not when I start making money. It's not when I get this job. Like, I can be happy now. And then it doesn't matter what happens around me, because if I can be happy in my lowest moment, I can be happy in my highest. So learning to work on yourself and take time for yourself, which is something I did not do in grad school. I was very focused on, because again, I always thought the next thing is going to make me happy. And so coming back and being like, I need to work on my own mental state so that I am happy. And like, I'm going to be upset sometimes, and that's fine. But overall, my mood is I'm happy and I feel secure no matter what I'm doing. That got real deep.
Yeah, you took it a little farther than what I was intending. I'm just kidding.
Sorry.
As a wise man once said, people are about as happy as they make their minds up to be. Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, okay. I was like, I don't know who that is. And I wanted to be like Jesus, but I didn't think that was it. Jesus. You know, our Southern roots be like, oh, bless up. Jesus.
Well, okay. Well, that is all the questions I really have for you today.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much to coming on and asking me these questions. And I'm really thankful that you're here, and we got to do this and, you know, dive a little into research and kind of my experiences and things, since I'm always, you know, asking other people their experiences.
Yeah, it was great to hear. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. How did I become so lucky? I will never know. So I look forward to maybe potentially doing this again in the future.
Yeah.
And I hope everyone enjoys the podcast episode.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And we will see you guys again in the next podcast episode. I want to thank you for coming, and thank you to everyone who is listening and has made it this far in this podcast. I want to let you know that the links to everything we talked about today are available below. And if you want updates on the podcast and advice through graduate school, you can sign up for those updates and get my graduate school guide bundle that has a bunch of different cool guides in it. And that will be available at sciencegradschoolcoach.com/STEMS podcast, which is also going to be in the links below this video. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you guys in the next episode.